Hello there, welcome to HFY Sci-Fi Galaxy, where humans face the unknown, outsmart the impossible, and turn every test into victory. So sit back and let the story begin.
The chicken bones landed on the wooden table in a pattern that made the old woman stop breathing for 3 full seconds. In 86 years of reading bones, Yelena Morozova had never seen this pattern. It meant something was falling from the sky, something that was not rain and not snow and not anything that belonged to this world. She stood from her chair, pulled her shawl tight around her shoulders, and walked to the door of her cabin. The cabin sat deep in the Siberian taiga, 3 hours from the nearest village, surrounded by pine trees so tall and thick that sunlight only touched the ground for 2 hours each day. People in the village said the cabin stood on chicken legs. They were being colorful, but they were not entirely wrong about the woman who lived inside it. Yelena opened the door and looked up. A streak of fire cut across the gray sky, screaming like a wounded animal, and smashed into the frozen ground 200 meters from her front step. The explosion knocked snow from every tree in sight and sent a wave of heat across her face. She put on her boots and walked toward the crater. The thing inside was not a meteor. It was a ship, if ships were made of dark metal that hummed and bled light from cracks in its skin. A door had broken open on impact, and through it, Yelena could see a creature. Tall, thin, gray skin like wet stone, 2 extra arms folded against its chest. Its eyes were open, but it was not alive. In its long fingers, it held a flat device that glowed with symbols she did not recognize. Yelena took the device. She carried it back to her cabin. She sat at her table and studied it until the symbols began to make sense, because Yelena had a gift for understanding things that did not want to be understood. By morning, she knew 3 facts. The creature was called a Valorian. It had come from a civilization that stretched across 46 star systems, and it had been mapping Earth the way a butcher maps a cow. She picked up her phone and called the only person she trusted. Daria answered on the second ring. She always did when her grandmother called, even at 4 in the morning, even from 3,000 kilometers away in her barracks near Volgograd. Come home, Yelena said. Bring your uniform. Bring your brain. Leave your fear, you will not need it. Daria arrived 31 hours later, driving a borrowed military truck through roads that were more ice than road. She was 23 years old, a junior lieutenant with sharp eyes and a way of moving through the world that made other soldiers uncomfortable. Her fitness reports called her exceptionally capable. Her psychological evaluation called her difficult to categorize. Her grandmother called her ready, finally. Yelena showed her the ship, showed her the dead alien preserved in the permafrost behind the cabin, showed her the device and the star maps and the invasion timeline. 18 months, Yelena said. They will send a harvest fleet. They have done this to over 200 worlds. They do not expect resistance because they have never found any worth worrying about. Daria studied the star maps for a long time. She had been raised in this cabin until she was 15. She had learned to track wolves before she learned to read. Yelena had taught her chess with pieces carved from bone and rules that changed without warning, because Yelena said the world does not play fair, and neither should you. I need to show this to my commanders, Daria said. Yes, but first understand something. Yelena sat down across from her and fixed her with eyes that were the color of frozen rivers. They will panic. Governments will argue. Politicians will waste months. You cannot let them. You must be the one who acts, because you are the one who was raised for this. You raised me to survive in a forest, grandmother. Yelena smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of someone who knew exactly what lived in the dark between the trees. The universe is a forest, child. I raised you for that too. Within 6 hours of Daria presenting the alien device to her commanding officer, she was sitting in a bunker beneath Moscow, across from people whose names were not in any government record, explaining how her 86-year-old grandmother had found a dead alien and stolen its homework. They believed her because they had no choice. The device was real. The dead alien was real. The harvest fleet was coming. They gave Daria a promotion that skipped 3 ranks and a mission that did not officially exist. Build a defense. Use whatever you need. Tell no one. If this works, we will shake your hand. If it fails, we never heard your name. Daria accepted without hesitation. She drove back to the cabin one last time before leaving for her new assignment. Yelena was waiting on the front step with a packed bag, a hunting knife that was older than the country they lived in, and one piece of advice. When you meet a monster, the old woman said, do not ask if it is hungry. Assume it is. Act accordingly. Daria took the bag and the knife and kissed her grandmother on both cheeks. Then she drove into the dark, toward a war that no one on Earth knew was coming, carrying everything the old woman in the forest had given her. A sharp mind, a steady nerve, and the absolute certainty that the dark was not something to fear. It was something to become. 11 folders landed on the table in front of Daria. Each one had a red stamp across the front that read, unsuitable for standard command structure. She opened the first one and smiled for the first time in weeks. The governments of Earth had agreed on exactly one thing. If this defense force failed, it never existed. That meant Daria got no budget, no official support, and no soldiers that any military actually wanted to keep. They gave her the broken ones. The ones who thought wrong, fought wrong, and followed orders only when the orders made sense. They gave her exactly the people she needed. Riku was first, a Japanese combat engineer who had been removed from 3 separate postings for building unauthorized weapons from parts he found in supply closets. His commanding officers said he was a liability. His creations said otherwise. He could turn a washing machine into something that would make a tank nervous. Adiz came next, a Nigerian signals specialist who heard things in radio static that computers missed. She had been flagged for obsessive pattern recognition after she intercepted a coded transmission that her superiors insisted did not exist. It did exist. They promoted the officer who took credit for finding it and transferred Adiz to a desk. Pyotr was the one Daria chose personally, a Belarusian medic the size of a refrigerator who sang lullabies to wounded soldiers while stitching their skin back together. He had hands that could thread a needle or bend a steel bar, depending on what the moment required. He had been disciplined twice for refusing to leave wounded enemy combatants behind during training exercises. A body in pain has no flag, he had said both times. The others filled out the unit. A Brazilian demolitions expert named Lucia, who could calculate explosive yields in her head faster than most computers. A South Korean pilot named Day One, who could fly anything with wings or engines or both. A Canadian sniper named Greta, who had once hit a target at a distance that her rifle was not technically capable of reaching. Her report on the incident simply read, "The bullet went where I told it to go." Daria gathered them in the taiga, near Yelena's cabin. The old woman watched from her window as 11 confused soldiers stepped out of the helicopter into knee-deep snow and stared at a forest that seemed to stare back. "This is where we train," Daria told them. "This is where we learn to fight something that has conquered 200 worlds without breaking a sweat." She showed them the alien ship. She showed them the data. She showed them what was coming. Nobody quit. Daria had expected that. People who thought wrong and fought wrong were usually people who understood, better than anyone, that the normal way of doing things was not going to work. Training lasted 14 months. Yelena helped in her own way, which meant she appeared at unexpected moments with advice that sounded like fairy tales. "The third son always wins," she told Daria one evening, because the first 2 were arrogant enough to use the front door. Daria translated this into tactical doctrine. Do not meet the enemy where they expect you. Do not fight the battle they prepared for. Make them fight your battle, in your house, by your rules. Riku tore the crash scout ship apart piece by piece. He figured out their energy shielding. He mapped their weapons systems. He found their weaknesses, and there were more weaknesses than anyone expected, because the Valorians had not fought a real war in 300 years. Their technology was advanced, but their tactics were old. They conquered species the way a boot crushes a bug. No adaptation, no creativity, just overwhelming force applied in the same pattern every single time. Adiz cracked their communication frequencies in 2 months. She could listen to Valorian fleet chatter the way a person listens to a neighbor's radio through a thin wall. She learned their language. She learned their habits. She learned that they were bored. Harvesting planets was routine work to them, like collecting groceries. Meanwhile, far from Earth, a Valorian harvest commander named Salith reviewed his mission briefing. Third planet of an unremarkable yellow star. Population of 8 billion soft-bodied bipeds with chemical rockets and primitive radio communications. Standard harvest. He would be home in 6 weeks. He noticed a footnote. His advanced scout had gone silent. He sent 2 more. Those scouts reached Earth orbit. They scanned. They transmitted. 12 hours later, their ships went dark. Adis had figured out how to send a signal that confused their navigation systems into thinking they were flying directly into the sun. The ships corrected course so aggressively that they tore themselves apart. Salith read the report. He read it again. He felt something he had never felt before. It was small. It was quiet. It was the first crack in a wall that had never been tested. Humans had a word for it. Unease. Back in the taiga, Daria stood over a holographic map of the solar system built from the alien scouts' technology. Her team gathered around her, breath fogging in the cold air of the makeshift command center. "We do not wait for them," Daria said, pointing to the asteroid belt. "Grandmother says you never let the wolf choose where to fight. You choose the ground. Then you make the wolf think it was his idea." Rika grinned. Adis nodded. Pyotr cracked his knuckles and hummed a lullaby. 11 broken soldiers. 1 woman raised by a witch. And a plan that no military academy on Earth or any other world would have approved. The forest was getting ready for visitors. Silence is not supposed to be frightening. Salith had traveled through the empty spaces between stars for 20 years, and silence was simply what space was. But this silence was different. This silence felt like it was listening. His harvest fleet, 42 warships and 300 transport vessels, sat at the edge of the solar system. Every scanner was active. Every frequency was monitored. And there was nothing. No radio chatter. No satellite broadcasts. No electromagnetic noise of any kind. The third planet should have been screaming with signals from 8 billion inhabitants and their primitive technology. Instead, the system was as quiet as a closed mouth. "Where are their communications?" Salith asked his sensor officer. "Gone, Commander. They have gone completely silent." Salith had harvested 11 worlds in his career. Every single one had been noisy, confused, and completely unaware of what was coming until the transport ships were already in their atmosphere. This was the first time a target species had shut up before he arrived. He did not like it. 14 months of preparation had turned Earth's solar system into something that looked empty and was anything but. Daria had overseen the construction of weapons platforms hidden inside asteroids, buried in the dust of Saturn's rings, and bolted to the dark sides of moons. Nothing was visible. Nothing broadcast a signal. Everything waited. Yelena had given Daria one more piece of advice before the fleet arrived. A trap that looks like a trap catches nothing. A trap that looks like an empty room catches everything. Salith sent his first patrol wing into the asteroid belt. 5 ships. Fast, well-armed, confident. They flew between the floating rocks in standard formation. Their shields were active. Their weapons were hot. Their crews were alert. None of it mattered. The asteroids moved. Not quickly, not dramatically. They just drifted slightly closer together, guided by tiny engines hidden deep inside them. And the 5 ships were crushed between walls of stone that weighed more than cities. There were no explosions, no energy signatures, no battle, just 5 ships becoming part of the rock. Salith lost 9 ships in 3 hours without ever seeing an enemy, hearing a weapon fire, or detecting a single hostile signal. His tactical display simply showed ship markers going dark, one after another, like candles blown out by a breath he could not feel. He pulled the fleet back to the outer system and tried long-range scanning. The scans returned nothing. Every installation, every weapon, every hidden platform was coated in material that Riku had salvaged from the crashed Valorian scout ship. Their own technology was being used to make them blind. For the first time in recorded Valorian military history, a harvest commander sent a message requesting reinforcements before making contact with the target species. His superiors were confused. They had never received such a message. They sent an observer. Her name was Alara. She was a senior fleet commander with 40 years of service and a reputation for solving problems by applying more force. She arrived on Salith's command ship, reviewed his reports with visible contempt, and immediately took tactical command. "You lost 9 ships to rocks," she said. "I will show you how to handle rocks." She sent a full battle group, 12 warships in tight formation with shields at maximum power, straight through the asteroid belt. The formation was designed to push aside anything in its path through sheer energy output. It was the Valorian answer to every problem. More power, more force, more. Daria watched them come on a display screen deep inside a bunker on Earth's moon. She watched the 12 bright dots push through the asteroid belt and emerge on the other side, heading toward Mars. "Let them through," she told Adiz. All 12. All 12. Let them feel brave." The battle group crossed Mars' orbit. They scanned Earth and found a planet that looked defenseless. No orbital stations. No visible weapons. Just cities and oceans and clouds. Alara smiled from her command ship at the edge of the system. "See? Rocks and fear. Nothing more." Then Daria closed a trap. The asteroid belt shifted behind the battle group, sealing the path they had come through. And from the 2 small moons of Mars, weapons platforms that had been dormant for months came alive all at once. The battle group was caught in a crossfire from angles that their tactical computers had not considered possible because the weapons were firing from positions that no rational military doctrine would use. Too close, too scattered, too reckless. Riku had designed the weapons specifically to exploit what he had learned from the crashed ship. Valorian shields were strong from the front, but thinner at odd angles, because no species they had ever fought attacked from 17 directions at once. Humans did. 7 ships were destroyed in the first 4 minutes. The remaining 5 turned and ran back toward the belt. 2 more were crushed by asteroids that had quietly repositioned during the battle. 3 ships made it back to the fleet. 3 out of 12. Alara stood on her command deck and watched the survivors limp home. Salith stood beside her. He said nothing. His face said everything. Alara walked to the communications console. Her hands were steady, but her voice was not. She composed a message to the Valorian High Command. She wrote and deleted the first line 6 times before settling on words that had never appeared in an official Valorian military report in the entire history of the Empire. "Advise extreme caution. The prey is not prey." She sent it. Then she stared at the small blue dot on her display, the 3rd planet of this unremarkable star, and tried to understand what kind of species could do what had just been done to her ships. In the bunker on the moon, Daria turned off her display and looked at Pyotr. "That was the welcome," she said quietly. "Now we prepare the house." The message arrived on every Valorian ship at the same time. It was written in their own language, using their own alphabet, transmitted on a frequency that was supposed to be impossible for any species outside the Empire to access. It read, "We ate your scouts. We wore their skins to learn your words. Leave, or we will wear yours." It was a lie. Daria had learned the Valorian language from the data Pad, her grandmother, had taken from the dead scout. She had not eaten anyone or worn anyone's skin. But Daria understood something about the Valorians that they did not understand about themselves. They were herd animals. Their ancestors had evolved on wide, open plains where the greatest danger was something hiding in the grass, something that looked like you until it was too late. The idea of a predator wearing the face of your own kind was buried so deep in their survival instincts that 300 centuries of civilization had not erased it. The message spread through the fleet like poison. Salith watched crew morale collapse in hours. Soldiers who had been bored and annoyed were now looking at each other with suspicion. If the humans could learn their language, what else could they learn? What else could they become? Alara ordered the message deleted from all systems. It was too late. Fear does not need a file to live in. It lives in the space between thoughts. She called for the full Valorian battle armada. 300 warships, the largest military force assembled in over a century. She would burn this system down to its star and salt the ashes. While the armada traveled toward Earth, Daria did something that Alara could not have predicted. She went to them. A single shuttle, broadcasting on an open channel, flew from Earth toward the Valorian fleet. One ship, no weapons, no escort, just Daria, Pyotr, and Adiz, flying into the teeth of a fleet that had enough firepower to turn their planet to dust. Alara could have destroyed the shuttle. She almost did. But curiosity is a strange thing, and Alara had never met a human. She wanted to see what kind of creature fights like this. She granted permission to board. Daria walked through the corridors of the Valorian command ship with her hands clasped behind her back. The corridors were built for beings a full foot taller than her. The light was too blue. The air smelled like copper and something sweet. Valorian soldiers lined the hallways, watching her pass, their four arms held rigid at their sides. They had seen humans in surveillance footage. Small, soft, short-lived. The data said they were a mid-tier species with fragile bones and laughable natural weapons. No clothes, no venom, no armor. In person, Daria did not match the data. She was not tall. She was not physically impressive. But she moved through their ship the way a woman moves through her own kitchen. There was no fear in her step, no honor eyes. She looked at the armed soldiers the way Yelena looked at wolves that wandered too close to the cabin. Not with aggression, with the calm patience of someone who had already decided how this ended. The meeting room was large and cold. Alara sat at a curved table with 6 of her senior officers. Daria sat across from them with Pyotr on her left and Adiz on her right. "You are brave," Alara said. "Or stupid." "My grandmother says there is no difference," Daria replied. "Only results." Daria offered terms. Leave this system. Erase Earth from Valorian star charts. Never return. In exchange, humans would not pursue the Valorian Empire into deep space. Alara laughed. It was a sharp sound like glass breaking. "You have killed a few ships with tricks and rocks. The Armada will turn your world to glass. You have nothing to bargain with." "We have your fear," Daria said simply. "You called for 300 ships to handle one planet. You have never done that before. Not once in the history of your empire. You are afraid, Commander, and you do not even have a word for what you are feeling because your species has not needed that word in 300 years. The room went very still. Daria stood. She looked at Alara for a long moment, and then she said something that would be repeated in Valorian history texts for centuries. "My grandmother told me something when I was small. She said the house in the forest is dark because it wants to be, not because it has no fire, because the darkness is the fire." She turned and walked out. Pyotr and Adiz followed. Nobody stopped them. Nobody moved. The Valorian soldiers in the corridor pressed themselves against the walls as Daria passed. Not because she was dangerous, but because something about the way she walked made them feel like the walls might close in behind her. Alara sat in the meeting room for a long time after the shuttle departed. One of her officers asked if they should destroy the shuttle before it reached Earth. "No," Alara said. "Why not?" Alara did not answer. She was thinking about the look in the human's eyes. Not anger, not bravado, something quieter, something that reminded her of the oldest stories from her homeworld, stories about things that waited in the tall grass and never blinked. Salith had found the human word for what he felt months ago. He had shared it with no one. But now, sitting in his quarters, reading the reports, listening to his crew whisper in hallways, he understood that the word applied to all of them. Dread. The humans called it dread. The Armada was coming. 300 ships to burn one world. And somewhere on that world, an old woman in a cabin poured herself a cup of tea and smiled. 300 warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of Earth's solar system. And for one brief moment, the stars themselves seemed to flinch. It was the largest military force the Valorian Empire had deployed against a single world in its entire history. Enough firepower to crack a planet's crust. Enough soldiers to occupy a continent. Enough arrogance to fill the space between galaxies. Salith stood on the observation deck of his ship and watched the Armada assemble. He had written personal letters to his family. He had sealed them and placed them in the ship's emergency beacon. Nobody else had done this. Nobody else believed it was necessary. Alara took command from the flagship at the center of the formation. She arranged the fleet in a standard harvest sphere, 300 ships forming a closing net around the solar system, designed to prevent escape. It had been used 200 times. It had never failed. Daria watched the sphere form on her displays inside the lunar bunker. Her team was spread across the solar system, each one at a different station, each one responsible for a different piece of what Daria called grandmother's welcome. Yelena herself was in a bunker beneath Moscow. She was 87 now. Her bones ached, and she had refused every offer of a more comfortable location. She sat in front of a video screen with a cup of tea and a direct line to Daria. When the army is too large to fight, Yelena said, "You do not fight the army. You fight its mind." Phase 1 began. Every Valorian communication channel was suddenly filled with sound. Not human voices. Not threats. Something worse. Adiz had recorded the distress calls from every Valorian ship that had been destroyed in the previous months and played them back on loop, layered on top of each other, mixed with human music chosen for a very specific purpose. Low drums, throats singing from the Siberian tundra, deep vibrations that hit frequencies which made Valorian inner ears ache and their balance falter. 300 ships heard their own dead screaming at them through their own radios. Phase 2 followed immediately. The Armada's formation sensors began showing contacts. Thousands of them. Ships' signatures everywhere, surrounding the fleet, outnumbering them 10 to 1. Alara's tactical display lit up like a sky full of hostile stars. She almost panicked. Almost. "Those are not real ships," Salith said quietly from behind her. He was right. Riku had seeded the outer system with millions of pieces of reflective debris, each one programmed to mimic a ship's energy signature. Ghost Fleet, Shadow Navy, an army made of mirrors and lies. But knowing the contacts were fake and feeling safe were two very different things. The Valorian crews did not have Salith's analytical calm. They saw 10,000 enemies and their hands began to shake. Alara ordered the fleet to break formation and engage the ghost contacts. It was a mistake. She knew at the moment the words left her mouth, but the alternative was to sit inside a closing ring of phantom ships and do nothing, and Alara had never done nothing in her life. The sphere broke apart. Ships scattered to chase shadows. And that was when Daria triggered Phase 3. For months, Earth's physicists had been studying the Valorian faster-than-light drive. They could not build one, but they could build something that disrupted one. A field generator that reached into the strange space that FDL drives used and twisted it, the way a hand twists a key in a lock. 20 generators activated across the solar system. The FDL disruption field snapped into place like a cage door slamming shut. Every Valorian ship in the system lost its ability to jump. Their escape routes vanished. They were trapped at sublight speed in a system that had been preparing for this moment for over a year. The battle lasted 9 days. It was not a battle in any way the Valorians understood. There was no decisive engagement, no grand clash of fleets. Instead, there was a constant, grinding, maddening series of attacks from every direction. Asteroids that moved, weapons that fired once and went silent, supply ships that simply vanished during shift changes. Daria did not try to destroy the Armada. She bled it. Every time the Valorians established a defensive position, something changed. A weapon appeared where nothing had been. A ship was struck from an angle that the computers said was impossible. The attacks came at random intervals, at random locations, with random intensity, because Daria understood that unpredictability is a weapon sharper than any blade. By day 4, Valorian crews were sleeping in shifts, their nerves stripped raw by the constant threat of an attack that could come from anywhere at any time. By day 6, soldiers on 3 ships refused orders to leave formation. By day 8, 5 ships surrendered. They broadcast on open channels, begging to be taken, because the unknown was worse than captivity. By day 9, Alara had 187 ships remaining. Most were damaged. All were exhausted. Her crews were hollow-eyed and flinching at shadows that might or might not be real. She stood on her command deck and stared at her tactical display. Then she opened a channel to Earth. "What are your terms?" she said. Daria's voice came back calm and clear. She repeated the exact same terms she had offered before the battle. "Leave. Erase Earth from your charts. Never return. Nothing more. Nothing less. Not harsher. Not softer. The same. Ilara closed her eyes. A species that fights like this and does not change its demands after winning was something she had no framework to understand. They were either the most merciful creatures in the galaxy or so confident in their power that her fleet's survival was simply not a factor in their calculations. She could not decide which possibility was more terrifying. Accepted, she whispered. The Valorian armada turned and limped toward the edge of the system. The FDL field dropped. 300 ships had entered. 187 left. In the lunar bunker, Daria turned off her display and sat in silence for a very long time. Then she called her grandmother. "It is done," she said. "No, child," Yelena replied, sipping her tea. "It is beginning." The first alien ambassador who came to Earth in peace was a Relari named Asen. He was small, barely reaching Daria's shoulder, with soft gray fur and eyes the size of plums. His hands would not stop trembling from the moment his shuttle touched down on the landing pad outside Geneva. He had heard the stories. Every species in the galaxy had heard the stories by now. A single uncontacted world had broken the Valorian armada. A death world species with fragile bones and short lifespans had made the most aggressive empire in known space turn around and go home. The stories grew with each retelling. Some said the humans had a weapon that could eat stars. Some said their general was not human at all, but something older, something from the dark between worlds. Some said their planet was alive and fought alongside them. Asen believed none of the stories. He also believed all of them. He was terrified. The Relari were a gentle species. They had no military, no weapons, no history of violence. They had been next on the Valorian harvest list, scheduled for collection in 2 years. When the Valorian Empire began pulling its forces back from the outer colonies to protect its core systems, the Relari suddenly found themselves free but completely unprotected in a galaxy that had many predators. So Asen came to Earth, to the house in the forest, to the thing that even the monsters feared. He was led through a building that was surprisingly plain. No golden halls, no towering monuments, just corridors with flat lighting and people walking quickly in simple uniforms. He had expected a fortress. This looked like an office. The door to Daria's room was open. She sat behind a wooden desk that had seen better decades. On the wall behind her hung a single framed photograph of a cabin in a snowy forest. On her desk sat a cup of tea, a stack of papers, and a hunting knife so old that the handle had been worn smooth by generations of hands. She stood when Asen entered. She was shorter than he expected. Her hair was tied back. Her uniform was clean but not decorated. She looked like someone who worked too much and slept too little and did not care about either. "Ambassador Asen," she said, "please sit. Would you like tea?" He sat. His hands were still trembling. She poured him tea from a pot that looked handmade, and she waited while he drank. She did not rush him. She did not speak. She simply sat and let him breathe. When he was ready, he told her about his people, their world, their culture of music and mathematics, their complete inability to defend themselves, their fear that without the Valorian threat, other empires would come, other harvesters, other boots looking for something to crush. Daria listened to every word. She asked questions. Good questions. Questions about Relari children and Relari art and what Relari food tasted like. She was genuinely interested, and Asen could tell the difference between genuine interest and political performance. When he finished, she said, "Then we will protect you. That is what we do." Asen's plum-sized eyes filled with tears, not from fear, from something he had no framework to process. The most dangerous species in the galaxy had just offered to shield his people, and they had asked for nothing. No tribute, no territory, no submission, just a chance to stand between the Relari and whatever came for them. Why, he managed. Daria considered the question. She looked at the photograph on her wall, the cabin in the forest, and something in her expression softened for just a moment. Because my grandmother taught me that strength without purpose is just noise, and purpose without compassion is just cruelty. We are strong. We have proven that. Now we prove what we are strong for. Word spread. The Relari were not the last to come. The Fenari, a species of engineers whose homeworld had been stripped by the Valorians a century ago, arrived seeking refuge. The Dolani, traders whose routes had collapsed when the empire began shrinking, came seeking stability. Dozens of species, large and small, strong and weak, all following the same rumor to the same small blue planet. Earth became not an empire, but a hearth. Daria built alliances the way her grandmother built fires, carefully, with patience, making sure each piece supported the others. Rika designed defense platforms for species that had never imagined needing them. Adiz built a communication network that linked half the galaxy. Pyotr opened medical centers on 6 worlds, learning alien biology with the same gentle hands that had stitched human soldiers back together in the taiga. The promise was simple and it never changed. If you are under our protection, then anyone who touches you touches us. And they know what that means. Yelena watched all of it from her cabin. She was very old now. The cabin was the same. The forest was the same. She drank her tea and read her bones and smiled the way she smiled, which was never warm, but always satisfied. A journalist traveled to the taiga to interview her. He asked about the stories, about Baba Yaga, about whether the comparison between the old witch of Russian folklore and what humanity had become was intentional. Yelena poured him tea. She looked at him with eyes like frozen rivers. Baba Yaga was never the villain, she said. People forget. She tested those who came to her door. The cruel, she ate. The brave, she helped. The lost, she guided home. She was terrible because the forest demanded it. She paused and looked out the window at the trees. The universe is a very large forest, and my granddaughter is the house. Far away, on the bridge of a Valorian warship patrolling the shrunken borders of a shrinking empire, a young officer read from a newly published historical text. The passage described humans. He read it aloud to his crew, and the bridge fell silent. They live on a world that tries to kill them every day. They are small, fragile, and short-lived. They should be nothing. But they are raised by their elders to be stubborn, compassionate, and absolutely without mercy when those they love are threatened. Their greatest general was raised by an old woman in a forest, and she fought the way old women in forests have always fought. With patience, with cunning, with the certainty that the dark is not something to fear. It is something to become. The officer closed the text. He looked at the star chart on his display. There was a region marked in red, a boundary that no Valorian ship was permitted to cross. Inside that boundary, a small blue planet sat at the center of a growing web of alliances that now included over 40 species. The notation on the chart was simple. It read, "Forbidden. The forest has a keeper." The young officer stared at it for a long time. Then he changed course, away from the boundary, away from the forest, away from the house that stood in the dark with its door open for the lost and its teeth bared for the cruel. The house remembered. The house always remembered.